"Start the car if it's really yours," said the millionaire. But his smile vanished in seconds. Richard Coleman felt his heart racing as he watched the executives laughing around him. He had just made a foolish bet with his business club partners, promising he could humiliate anyone they chose in the parking lot. That's when he spotted a man of simple appearance standing next to his orange sports car. The fellow had messy grey hair, a long beard, and wore old clothes that seemed to have seen better days. "That one there," Richard pointed to the stranger. "I'll show you how to put a poor man in his place." The 5 men in suits positioned themselves behind him, eager to witness another demonstration of the arrogance Richard had perfected over the years. The businessman approached with firm steps, swinging the car keys provocatively. "Hey, friend," Richard called out loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "Like the car?" The man turned slowly. He had tired eyes, but there was something in them that Richard couldn't decipher at the moment. A kind of melancholy mixed with resignation. "It's really beautiful," replied the stranger calmly. "Want to take it for a spin?" asked Richard with a malicious smile. "That is, if you know how to drive something like this." The man didn't respond immediately. He just observed the vehicle carefully, as if studying every detail of the shiny orange body. "Do you know how much a car like this costs?" Richard insisted. "Probably more than you earn in 10 years. The partners laughed loudly, approving the taunt. Richard felt in control of the situation, as always happened when he exercised his power over people he considered inferior. "Actually," the man finally said, "I know this model well." "Oh, really?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "Then prove it. If this car is really yours, as you're pretending, start it." The challenge echoed through the parking lot. Some other club employees stopped to watch the scene unfolding. Richard extended the keys with a mocking air, absolutely certain the man would back away, embarrassed. But what happened next completely knocked the ground from under his feet. The stranger took the keys without hesitation and walked to the driver's door. He inserted the key into the lock with precise movements, like someone who had done it thousands of times. The engine roared on the first try. Richard's smile disappeared instantly. "How did you—" he began to ask, but the words died in his throat when the man got out of the car and pointed to a small scratch on the dashboard. "This scratch here," said the stranger calmly, "was made by a screwdriver in 2019 when I was adjusting the sound system. And this small stain on the seat," he continued, opening the door and showing an almost imperceptible mark, "happened when I spilled coffee during a speed test." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard felt the blood drain from his face as the partners watched him with expressions of shock and confusion. How did that man know such specific details about his car? "Who are you?" Richard asked with a trembling voice. "My name is Jack Peterson," replied the man, "and this car was stolen from my workshop 2 years ago." The accusation fell like a bomb in the middle of the group. Richard felt his legs go weak and tried to formulate a response, but the words simply wouldn't come. How to explain a situation he didn't fully understand himself? "This is ridiculous," he managed to say finally. "This car is mine. I have all the documents." "Documents can be forged," said Jack with sadness, "but memories can't. I built this car with my own hands. Every bolt, every adjustment, every modification was done by me." Richard looked at his partners seeking support, but found only distrustful gazes. The situation was spiraling out of control in a way he had never imagined. "Prove it," challenged Richard, trying to regain his authority. "If you really are the owner, prove it." Jack sighed deeply before answering. There was an old pain in his eyes, as if this confrontation brought back memories he preferred to keep buried. "The engine was modified to increase power by 15%. I replaced the original exhaust system with a custom one I made in the workshop. The orange color isn't factory standard. It was a special paint I developed by mixing 3 different shades." Every word Jack spoke was a revelation that made Richard's position increasingly untenable. The details were too specific to be invented, and some of the partners, who were car enthusiasts, confirmed with nods that the mentioned modifications actually existed on the vehicle. "Besides," Jack continued, "there's a small engraving behind the right rearview mirror. The initials JP followed by the year 2018. I used to mark all the cars that came through my workshop." Richard ran to the car and checked the mentioned spot. There it was, engraved almost imperceptibly. JP 2018. His legs almost gave way. "How did you get this car?" asked one of the partners, breaking the tense silence. Richard opened and closed his mouth several times before managing to articulate a response. "I bought it from a dealer. Everything legal with documentation." "Which dealer?" insisted another partner. "Marcus Reynolds," replied Richard, breaking into a cold sweat. "He has a shop in the central area." Jack shook his head sadly. Marcus Reynolds. I should have guessed. That man has a reputation for dealing cars of questionable origin, but I could never prove anything against him. The tension in the air was palpable. Small groups of employees and club regulars began to form around the discussion, drawn by the raised voices and the seriousness of the situation. "Look," said Richard, trying to sound reasonable, "even if your story is true, I bought this car in good faith. I didn't know anything about this." "I understand," replied Jack, "but that doesn't change the fact that it was stolen. My workshop was broken into early 1 October 2022 morning. They took this car and 3 others that were there for repairs." "Did you report the theft?" asked one of the partners. "Of course I did, but you know how these things go. No clues, no working security cameras, no witnesses. The case was closed after a few months. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Richard felt the situation slipping completely from his control. Not only had he lost the humiliating bet he had proposed, but now he found himself at the center of an accusation that could destroy his reputation in the business club and the community. "All right," said Richard, trying to maintain his composure. "Let's resolve this in a civilized manner. If you have a claim to the car, we can talk about compensation." "Compensation?" Jack stared at him with an expression mixing disbelief and indignation. "Sir, you don't understand. That wasn't just a car to me. It was the symbol of everything I had built." Jack's voice began to tremble slightly, revealing emotions he had tried to keep under control. "I worked 20 years to open my workshop. This car was the first one I managed to modify completely, from scratch. It was my showcase, my business card. When it was stolen, I lost not only the vehicle, but also most of my clients." The account unexpectedly touched some of those present. Even Richard's partners, accustomed to the world of business and financial disputes, seemed moved by the sincerity and evident pain in the mechanic's voice. "Why didn't you just buy another one?" one of the men asked more gently. Jack let out a bitter laugh. "With what money? After the theft, my shop never recovered. Without the car to attract customers, without resources to invest in new equipment, I had to close 2 months later." The silence that followed was heavy with discomfort. Richard felt increasingly small hearing this story. His attempt to humiliate a stranger had turned into something much more complex and painful. "And since then," asked another partner, "since then, I've been doing odd jobs wherever I can. I fix bicycles, work at friends' shops, do small welding jobs, whatever comes up." Jack looked at the car again, with a mixture of nostalgia and melancholy. "Sometimes I come by just to see the beautiful cars. It reminds me of the times when I had mine too." The confession hit Richard like a punch to the gut. The man he had randomly chosen to humiliate wasn't there by chance or with bad intentions. He was simply reliving memories of a past he had lost traumatically. "Listen," Richard began, genuinely disturbed by the situation. "I really didn't know any of this when I bought the car." "I believe you," Jack replied, "but you need to understand that, for me, it's not just an object. It's part of my life, my history." One of the partners, clearly uncomfortable, whispered something in Richard's ear. The businessman nodded and stepped aside with the group, leaving Jack alone by the car. "Man, this is really strange," murmured one of the men. "If his story is true—" "And it seems it is," interrupted another. "He knows too many details about the car." "What are you going to do?" asked a third. Richard ran his hands through his hair, feeling cornered. He had bought the car for a price that, now that he thought about it, was really suspicious. Marcus Reynolds had been insistent about the need for discretion in the transaction, something he had interpreted at the time as a negotiation strategy. "I don't know," Richard admitted. "If I return the car like this, I lose a fortune. and I'm not even sure I'll be able to get the money back from Marcus. But if you don't return it, you're left with a stolen car, pointed out one of the partners. The situation had become a moral dilemma that Richard wasn't prepared to face. His entire life had been built on the premise that power and money solved any problem. Now he found himself in a situation where these tools were insufficient. While the group whispered, Jack remained by the car, gently running his hand over the body as if petting a beloved animal. There was a tenderness in his gestures that completely contrasted with the harshness of the situation. "Can I ask you something?" Richard said, returning to Jack's side. "Of course. How can you be so calm? If I were in your place, I'd be furious." Jack smiled sadly. "Sir, with age, you learn that anger doesn't solve anything. And besides, seeing my car well cared for is already a relief. At least I know it wasn't destroyed or abandoned." The answer made Richard even more uncomfortable. He was used to direct confrontations, arguments about power and money. He didn't know how to handle the serenity and dignity Jack was showing. "But you're not going to give up on it, are you?" Richard asked. "I can't," Jack replied simply. "It would be like giving up a part of myself." At that moment, an elegant woman approached the group. She wore a discreet business dress and carried a designer bag that Richard immediately recognized. It was his wife, Helen. "Honey, you've been here for over an hour," said Helen, approaching. "Dinner at home." Helen stopped speaking when she saw the tense expression on her husband's face and the strange configuration of the group. Her gaze swept over those present until it settled on Jack. There was a moment of mutual recognition that didn't go unnoticed by Richard. "Jack?" said Helen, incredulous. "Jack Peterson. Mrs. "Helen?" replied Jack, smiling genuinely for the first time since the conversation began. "It's been so long." Richard felt a chill in his stomach when he realized his wife knew the mechanic. The situation, which was already complicated, had just become even more complex. "Do you two know each other?" asked Richard, trying to keep his voice casual. "Of course we know each other," replied Helen, looking at her husband with surprise. "Jack was my dad's mechanic. He took care of our family car for years since I was a teenager." Richard's world seemed to crumble. Not only had his attempt at humiliation failed spectacularly, but now he discovered that the man he had chosen to provoke had a personal connection with his family. "Jack, what are you doing here?" asked Helen, genuinely concerned. "It's a long story, Mrs. Helen," replied Jack, casting a discreet glance at Richard. Helen noticed the tension in the air and began connecting the dots. Her gaze swept over the orange car, her visibly nervous husband, Jack, with the keys in his hand, and the partners watching everything in silence. "Richard," said Helen slowly, "tell me you didn't do what I'm thinking." "I didn't do anything wrong," Richard defended himself. "I just offered for him to drive the car." Helen knew her husband too well to believe that simplified version of the facts. She could tell from the partners' faces that something much more serious had happened. "Jack," said Helen, ignoring her husband, "do you want to tell me what really happened here?" Jack hesitated. He didn't want to cause problems between the couple, but he also felt that Helen deserved to know the truth. "Your husband challenged me to start the car thinking I wouldn't be able to," explained Jack calmly. "Except this car was stolen from my shop 2 years ago. I recognized it immediately." Helen's face turned pale. She looked at Richard with an expression of shock and disappointment that he had never seen before. "Stolen?" repeated Helen. "You bought a stolen car?" "I didn't know," protested Richard. "I bought it from a known dealer with all the documentation in order." "Marcus Reynolds?" asked Helen, and the fact that she knew the name confirmed Richard's worst suspicions. "How did you—" "Because I warned you not to do business with that man," Helen exploded. "Remember, when you told me about the opportunity to buy a luxury car for a price well below market, I told you it seemed strange, that you should investigate more." The argument between the couple began attracting even more attention. Club employees positioned themselves strategically to listen to the conversation without seeming intrusive, while Richard's partners exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Helen, let's not discuss this here," tried Richard, worried about public exposure. "No?" Helen was visibly agitated. "Then when are we going to discuss it?" When the news that my husband drives a stolen car reaches the newspapers, Jack felt compelled to intervene. Mrs. Helen, please don't fight because of me. I don't want to cause problems in your family. Jack's kindness only increased Helen's indignation at her husband's behavior. Jack, you've always been a decent person, and look how my husband treated you. Helen! Richard tried to interrupt her, but she wouldn't allow it. No, Richard, enough. You humiliated a man our family respected, using a car that belongs to him. This is unacceptable. Richard's embarrassment reached a level he had never experienced before. Being scolded by his wife in front of business partners and strangers was a humiliating experience that deeply wounded his ego. Jack, Helen continued, forgive me for my husband's behavior. This doesn't represent who we are as a family. There's nothing to forgive, Mrs. Helen, Jack replied. Your husband didn't know who I was when this all started. That doesn't justify how he treated you, Helen insisted. Richard, you will return the car to Jack immediately. Helen, it's not that simple, Richard protested. There are legal matters, financial matters. Helen stared at him furiously. The only matter here is doing the right thing. At that moment, a teenager approached the group. He was about 17, wearing the uniform of an expensive private school and carrying a designer backpack. It was Brian, the son of Richard and Helen. Mom, Dad, are you okay? Brian asked, noticing the tension. I heard you arguing from way over there. When Brian saw Jack, his face lit up with recognition and joy. Mr. Jack, the young man exclaimed. What a surprise to see you here. Richard and Helen exchanged confused looks. How did their son know Jack? Hi, Brian, Jack replied, smiling. How are you? Great. My car has been working perfectly ever since you fixed it. I couldn't believe it when I saw you working at that little shop near the school. The revelation that Jack had repaired their son's car without the parents' knowledge added another layer of complexity to the already complicated situation. When was this? Helen asked. Last month, Brian replied naturally. My car broke down on the way to school. Mr. Jack was working at a shop nearby and helped me. He didn't even want to charge for the service. Richard felt a mixture of gratitude and shame. The man he had tried to humiliate had helped his son without expecting anything in return. Why didn't you tell me? Richard asked Brian. I was going to, but I forgot. I didn't think it was important, the teenager replied, confused by his parents' reaction. Jack seemed as surprised as the others by the revelation that Brian was Richard and Helen's son. I didn't know Brian was your son, Mr. Richard, Jack said. If I had known... What? You wouldn't have helped? Helen asked, still angry with her husband. On the contrary, Jack replied, I would have taken even more care with the work. Jack's response further highlighted the contrast between his natural generosity and the arrogance Richard had shown earlier that afternoon. Mr. Jack, Brian said, sensing something was wrong. Did something happen? Jack looked at Richard, making it clear that it was up to him to explain the situation to his son. Richard found himself forced to take responsibility for something he would rather avoid. Brian, Richard began with difficulty, this car you're looking at belonged to Mr. Jack. It was stolen from his shop 2 years ago. Stolen. Brian looked from his father to the car, trying to process the information. But this is your car, Dad. I bought it without knowing it was stolen, Richard explained. Mr. Jack recognized it and is trying to get it back. Brian looked at Jack with an expression of compassion that surprised the adults present. Mr. Jack, I'm so sorry. It must be awful to lose something so important. Thank you, Brian. You're a good boy. Dad, Brian said, turning to Richard, you're going to give the car back to him, right? Their son's direct and innocent question struck Richard more deeply than all the adults' arguments. How could he explain to a teenager that the situation was complicated when, in the young man's eyes, the solution was obvious? Brian, it's more complicated than you think, Richard tried to explain. Why? The teenager insisted. If the car is his and it was stolen, the right thing is to return it, isn't it? The simple and direct logic of his son left Richard without an immediate answer. Helen took advantage of the silence to intervene. That's exactly what I was trying to tell your father, Brian. Richard felt cornered by his own family. The values he and Helen had tried to teach Brian were being used against him in a situation where his own integrity was in question. "All right," said Richard, finally giving in to the pressure. "Jack, let's resolve this, but I need you to understand that I lost a lot of money in this story." "I understand," replied Jack, "and I'm sorry that you were deceived too. Marcus Reynolds hurt both of us." Jack's statement surprised Richard. He expected hostility, demands, perhaps even legal threats. Instead, he found understanding and solidarity. "How do you propose to resolve this?" asked one of the partners, finally speaking up. "I need to get my car back," said Jack simply. "As for the money that Mr. Richard lost, that's a matter between him and the dealer." "But can you prove that the car is yours?" asked another partner. Jack sighed. "That's the problem. My shop caught fire 3 months after the theft. I lost all the documents, photos, records. Everything that could prove my ownership turned to ashes. The revelation that Jack had suffered not only the theft of the car but also a fire that destroyed his shop had a profound impact on everyone present. The sequence of tragedies that had befallen the man was almost unbelievable. "My God, Jack," murmured Helen, "why didn't you come to us? Dad always said you were like family." "Pride, perhaps," admitted Jack, "or shame. I didn't want to bother you with my problems." "Problems?" Helen seemed genuinely indignant. "Jack, you took care of our family's cars for 15 years. You were never a burden. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now continuing." The conversation was taking on a more emotional tone, and Richard felt increasingly like an intruder in the situation. The relationship between his family and Jack had a much deeper history than he had imagined. "How did the fire happen?" asked Brian, showing a youthful curiosity mixed with genuine concern. "Problems with the electrical installation," explained Jack. "The shop was old. I didn't have the money to do all the necessary repairs. One night, the faulty wiring caused a short circuit." "Did you have insurance?" asked Richard. Jack shook his head no. "Insurance was too expensive. I was trying to save up to buy new equipment to try to recover the shop after the car theft. It was a mistake that cost me everything." Jack's story was a sequence of tough decisions and bad luck that had led to his current precarious situation. Richard began to understand that the man before him was not just a theft victim, but someone who had fought against adverse circumstances and lost. "And since then you've been doing odd jobs?" asked Helen. "Yes. I work wherever I can, sometimes in small shops, sometimes fixing appliances, welding gates, whatever comes up." "But you're a specialized mechanic," protested Brian. "Why don't you open another shop?" Jack smiled sadly at the innocence of the question. "To open a shop, Brian, you need money to rent a space, buy equipment, tools, parts for inventory. It takes tens of thousands of dollars just to start." "And you can't get a loan from the bank?" insisted the teenager. "Banks only lend money to those who already have money," replied Jack with gentle irony. "No guarantees, no positive credit history, no proof of fixed income. They won't take the risk." Jack's explanation about the practical difficulties of starting over was educating Brian about economic realities his privileged life hadn't allowed him to know. "That's unfair," declared Brian with the characteristic indignation of adolescence. "That's life," Jack replied philosophically. "Everyone does what they can with the cards they're dealt." Richard observed the conversation between Jack and his son with mixed feelings. On one hand, he admired how the mechanic handled adversity. On the other, he felt uncomfortable with Brian's exposure to social realities he had tried to protect him from. "Jack," Richard finally said, "let's be practical. Even if I agree to return the car, can you afford to maintain it? Insurance, fuel, maintenance? It's expensive." The question was legitimate, but how it was asked still revealed traces of Richard's condescending attitude. "Mr. Richard," Jack replied with dignity, "when I had my car, I could maintain it just fine. It was my work tool, my business card. Without it, I couldn't even keep the shop running." "How so?" asked Helen. "This car attracted customers," Jack explained. When people saw a mechanic who could turn an ordinary car into a machine like this, they knew he knew his stuff. It was my advertisement. The explanation made sense to everyone present. In professions like mechanics, practical demonstration of skill was worth more than any diploma or certificate. So you're saying that, with the car back, you could reopen the shop? Asked one of the partners. I could try, Jack replied. Of course I'd need capital to rent a space, buy basic tools, but at least I'd have a way to show my work to potential customers. And where would you get that capital? The partner insisted. Jack shrugged. I'd work even more odd jobs, save every penny, maybe get a smaller loan using the car as collateral. That would take years, Richard observed. Maybe, Jack agreed. But it would be a fresh start. Right now, I don't even have that. Jack's determination impressed everyone. Despite all the adversity, he hadn't given up on rebuilding his life. This resilience contrasted sharply with Richard's tendency to give up at the first financial obstacle. Dad, Brian suddenly said, why don't you help Mr. Jack reopen the shop? The teenager's innocent suggestion dropped like a bomb in the middle of the conversation. Richard looked at his son as if he'd suggested something absurd. Brian, it's not that simple. Why not? The boy insisted. You have money. Mr. Jack has the knowledge. You could be partners. Brian, Helen intervened, noticing her husband's discomfort. These things are more complicated than you imagine. But the idea had been planted and began to germinate in the minds of those present. One of Richard's partners, known for his diversified investments, showed interest. You know it's not a bad idea, the man said. The luxury car market in our city is growing. A specialized shop with a truly competent mechanic. Charles, are you serious? Richard asked his partner. Why not? We just saw an impressive demonstration of this man's technical knowledge, and from what I understand, he has experience in the field. Jack watched the conversation with a mixture of hope and skepticism. He had learned not to get his hopes up with promises, especially from wealthy people who could change their minds as easily as they decided where to have lunch. Gentlemen, Jack intervened, I appreciate the interest, but first, I need to resolve the matter of my car. The rest, well, we'll see. Of course, Charles agreed, but consider the possibility. A well-equipped shop, specializing in imported and luxury cars, could be an excellent business. Richard felt pressured from several sides. His family was clearly on Jack's side. His partners showed interest in a possible partnership, and he saw himself as the villain of the story that had unfolded. All right, Richard finally said. Jack, I'll return your car, but I need a few days to sort out the bureaucratic matters. Bureaucratic matters? Asked Helen suspiciously. The car is financed, Richard admitted reluctantly. I'll need to pay off the loan before I can transfer ownership. The revelation that Richard had financed a stolen car complicated the situation even further. Helen stared at him with an expression of disbelief. Richard, tell me you didn't finance a car without checking its origin. Helen, at the time the deal seemed legitimate. Richard defended himself. Marcus showed me all the documents. It even had a service history. Fake documents, pointed out one of the partners. I know that now, Richard admitted, irritated. At the time I had no reason to suspect. Jack felt uncomfortable with the family argument his presence had caused. Mr. Richard, he said, if it's going to cause problems in your family, we can leave things as they are. I'm used to it already. No, Helen interrupted energetically. Jack, you can't give up your rights because of my husband's mistakes. Helen is right, Brian agreed. Mr. Jack, you can't let someone keep your things just because it's more complicated to get them back. The passionate defense by Helen and Brian deeply moved Jack. For 2 years, he had grown accustomed to being ignored, to having his complaints about the theft treated as unimportant cases. Now, for the first time, he felt that someone truly cared about his situation. Mrs. Helen, Brian, you are very kind, Jack said with evident emotion in his voice. But I don't want to cause problems for your family. The problems already exist, Helen declared, casting a stern look at Richard. And they weren't caused by you. The tension between the couple was palpable. Richard's partners exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly wanting to distance themselves from the family situation unfolding before them. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation another time," one of them suggested. "No," Helen said firmly. "We're going to resolve this now. Richard, how long do you need to pay off the loan?" "A few days, a week at most." "And then?" "Then I'll transfer the car to Jack," Richard replied, resigned. Jack shook his head. "I don't have the money to pay for the transfer, the licensing, those things." "That's my problem," said Richard. "After all, it was my mistake that caused all this mess." Richard's offer to cover the costs of regularizing the vehicle was seen by everyone as a minimal gesture of acknowledging his responsibility in the situation. "And what about what you lost in the deal with Marcus?" asked Helen. "I'll try to recover it, maybe sue the man, but that's my problem, not Jack's." "Correct," Helen agreed. "Jack has nothing to do with that." An awkward silence fell over the group. The situation had been resolved, at least in principle, but the atmosphere remained tense due to the family implications of what had happened. "Jack," said Charles, breaking the silence, "could you consider our conversation about the shop?" "I can listen," Jack replied cautiously, "but I'm not promising anything." "Of course. How about we meet in a few days after this car issue is settled?" "Maybe?" Richard watched the interaction between his partner and Jack with mixed feelings. On one hand, he would be happy if Jack managed to restart his life. On the other, he felt excluded from an opportunity that his own mistake had created. "Charles," said Richard, "if you're really going to talk business, I'd like to participate." The request surprised everyone, especially Helen and Jack. "Why?" asked Charles. Richard hesitated before answering. He wasn't sure of his own motivations. "Maybe because I feel I owe something to Jack, or maybe because I recognize a good opportunity when I see one." "Mr. Richard," said Jack, "I don't want your pity or your guilt as the basis for a business." Jack's direct and dignified response impressed Richard. The mechanic had a sense of self-esteem that hadn't been broken by adversity or recent humiliation. "It's not pity," Richard replied, "it's recognition. You demonstrated more knowledge about cars in 10 minutes than many experts I know can in an hour." "Richard is right," Charles agreed. "Your technical competence is evident." Helen watched the conversation with renewed interest. She began to see a possibility of something positive emerging from the awkward situation her husband had created. "Jack," she said, "you should at least hear their proposal. You have nothing to lose." "Mrs. Helen, I've already lost a lot in life by trusting the wrong people," Jack replied. "Now I'm more careful." "I understand," said Helen, "but not everyone is the same, and you've always been an excellent judge of character." Helen's endorsement meant a lot to Jack. He had known the family for years and deeply respected her opinion. "All right," Jack agreed. "Let's talk when the car issue is resolved." "Perfect," said Charles. "I'm sure we can structure something interesting for everyone." Brian, who had watched the entire negotiation with teenage fascination, finally spoke up. "Mr. Jack, if you really open a workshop, can I intern there?" The question took everyone by surprise, especially Richard and Helen. "Brian," said Helen, "you have to finish your studies first." "I know, Mom. I'm talking about a summer internship or weekends. I want to learn about mechanics." Richard looked at his son as if seeing him for the first time. Brian had always shown interest in cars, but had never expressed a desire to work with his hands or learn a technical trade. "Why do you want to do that?" asked Richard. "Because it's interesting," Brian replied, "and because Mr. Jack teaches things you don't learn in school." Jack was touched by the young man's interest. "Brian, if your parents allow it, and if we really open a workshop, I'd be honored to have you as an intern." "Really?" Brian smiled widely. "Of course. But working in a workshop is tough. You'd have to be willing to get dirty, sweat, lift heavy things, "I'm in," Brian exclaimed enthusiastically. Helen and Richard exchanged glances. The idea of their son working in a workshop wasn't part of the plans they had made for his education, but they saw the genuine sparkle in the teenager's eyes. "We'll discuss this at home," Helen said diplomatically. "Of course, Mom, but you'll think about it carefully, right?" "We'll think about it," Helen promised. The group began to disperse naturally. Richard's partners politely said goodbye to Jack and moved away, clearly relieved to escape the family tension. Charles left his business card with Jack before leaving. "Jack," said Helen, "you have our phone number. If you need anything while this car issue gets resolved, don't hesitate to call." "Thank you, Mrs. Helen. You've always been very kind to me." "And you've always been loyal to our family," she replied. "It's the least I can do." Richard extended his hand to Jack in a formal gesture of farewell. "Jack, we'll talk in a few days about the car documents." Jack shook the offered hand, noticing that Richard avoided direct eye contact. "I'll be waiting, Mr. Richard." "And Jack," said Richard, finally looking the mechanic in the eyes, "I'm sorry for what happened today. At the beginning, I mean. It wasn't right." The apology, though late, was a gesture that Jack appreciated. "It's all right, Mr. Richard. Sometimes things happen for a reason." After the family walked away, Jack stood alone in the parking lot, watching the orange car that would soon be his again. There was a mix of joy and apprehension in his feelings. Getting the car back was an important victory, but it also brought responsibilities and expectations he wasn't sure he could fulfill. In the following days, Richard kept his promise. He paid off the car loan and started the transfer process. During this period, he had time to reflect on the events that had unfolded in the club's parking lot. The conversation with Helen at home had been particularly difficult. She had made clear her disappointment not only with him buying a stolen car, but mainly with how he had treated Jack initially. "Richard," she had said in the privacy of their bedroom, "what you did was cruel. Trying to humiliate someone just to impress your friends is beneath you." "I know," Richard had admitted. "It was a stupid mistake." "It wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. And it showed a side of you I don't like seeing." Helen's criticism had stung because it was fair. Richard knew his arrogance had created the whole embarrassing situation. "How can I fix this?" "By doing more than just returning the car," Helen had replied. "Do something that really helps Jack start over." Helen's suggestion echoed thoughts Richard himself had been having. Simply returning the car seemed insufficient in light of the suffering Jack had endured over the past 2 years. It was with this mindset that Richard sought out Charles to seriously discuss the possibility of investing in a workshop with Jack as a technical partner. "Are you serious?" asked Charles when Richard presented his proposal. "Completely. I think we should do this right. Set up a first-class workshop with modern equipment, adequate space, everything that's needed." "And how much are you willing to invest?" Richard mentioned an amount that made Charles raise his eyebrows. "That's a significant investment," Charles observed. "It's a smart investment," Richard corrected. "Jack has shown exceptional technical knowledge. The luxury car market is growing in our city, and it would be a way to fix the mistake I made." Charles studied Richard's face, looking for signs that this was just an impulsive emotional decision. "Have you talked to your wife about this?" "I have. She approves." "And with Jack himself?" "Not yet. I want to structure a solid proposal before presenting it." "All right, let's study the feasibility. But Richard, if we do this, it has to be a real business, not disguised charity." "I completely agree. Jack deserves to be treated as a partner, not as a favor." While Richard and Charles worked on the details of the possible investment, Jack lived through days of anxiety and expectation. Knowing his car was about to be returned brought joy, but also worry about what he would do from there. He had saved some money in recent months doing odd jobs, but it was a small amount, insufficient for any ambitious project. The prospect of a partnership with Richard and Charles was tempting, but also frightening. He had learned to be wary of promises from wealthy people. It was Helen who arranged the next meeting. He called Jack a few days after their conversation at the club and invited him to lunch at his house. "Mrs. Helen, you don't need to trouble yourself," Jack protested. "It's no trouble, Jack. It's a pleasure. Besides, Richard and I want to talk to you about some things." The lunch was scheduled for a Sunday, and Jack arrived at the Coleman house wearing his best clothes, which still seemed modest compared to the luxury of the residence. The house was located in an upscale neighborhood of the city, with well-kept gardens and a garage that Jack estimated could hold at least 4 cars. It was a tangible reminder of the class difference between him and the family hosting him. Helen greeted Jack at the door with a genuine smile and led him to a comfortable living room. Richard was present but seemed slightly nervous. Brian came running down the stairs when he heard Jack's arrival. "Mr. Jack, so glad you came." "Hi, Brian. How are your studies going?" "Good, but I'm more interested in learning about cars. I bought some books on mechanics." "That's great. Studying theory is important, but it's practice that really teaches you." During lunch, the conversation was relaxed, focusing mainly on memories of the times when Jack took care of Helen's family cars. They were pleasant memories that helped ease the tension that still existed between Jack and Richard. After lunch, Richard finally brought up the main subject. "Jack, the car is ready to be transferred to you. All the documents are in order." "Thank you, Mr. Richard. I really appreciate it. But I want to talk about something else too. Charles and I have been studying the possibility of investing in a specialized workshop, and we'd like to have you as a technical partner." Jack listened to the proposal carefully, asking specific questions about financial and operational details. He was impressed with the level of planning that Richard and Charles had done. "It's a generous offer," Jack said finally, "but I need to understand one thing. Are you doing this out of pity, or because you really believe in the business?" "Why do you ask?" questioned Richard. "Because if it's out of pity, it won't work. Businesses based on feelings tend to fail when the feelings fade." Richard admired Jack's insight into business dynamics. "It's a legitimate business," Richard assured. "Of course, there's an element of compensation for what happened, but mainly it's because we recognize a real opportunity." "And how would the partnership work?" "You would contribute technical knowledge and experience. We provide the capital for setup and initial operation. Profits would be divided proportionally to contributions." "What percentage are you thinking for me?" 30%. Jack considered the proposal. It was more than he had expected, but less than he thought his experience was worth. "I would like 40%. "Why?" "Because I'm the one who will actually make the business work. You can invest money, but I'll be investing my life, my reputation, my knowledge accumulated over 20 years in the profession." Richard and Helen exchanged glances. The negotiation was unfolding exactly as they had expected. Jack was treating the proposal as a real business, not as charity. 35%, Richard counter-offered. 40, insisted Jack, or there's no deal. Jack's firmness impressed everyone in the room, including Brian, who watched the negotiation with fascination. "All right," Richard agreed after a pause. 40%. "Are you sure?" Helen asked her husband. "Yes, Jack is right. He's the one who will make the business succeed." "So, do we have a deal?" asked Jack. "We do, but with a few conditions." "What are they?" "First, you accept Brian as an intern." Jack smiled. "I accept, but he'll really work. It won't be a walk in the park." "Second condition, you accept a fixed monthly salary in addition to profit sharing." "Why?" "Because you need money to live while we set up the business. We don't want you having to take side jobs and split your focus between projects." Jack was moved by the consideration. "That's fair. I accept." "Third condition, you have complete autonomy over all technical decisions. We won't interfere with the operational side." "What if there are disagreements about overall strategy?" "We'll vote, but technical matters are yours." "Perfect." Helen watched the conversation with satisfaction. She could see Richard was genuinely excited about the project, not just fulfilling a moral obligation. "When do we start?" asked Jack. "Immediately. I've already identified some possible locations to rent. How about we view some this week?" "Sounds good." Brian interrupted the adults' conversation. "Mr. Jack, when can I start the internship?" "When your parents authorize it and when we have a suitable location operating." "Dad, Mom, can I?" Helen looked at Richard, who nodded positively. "You can, Brian, but on the condition that your studies aren't affected. I promise they won't be." Brian's excitement was contagious. Jack felt honored by the trust the family was placing in him. "Jack," said Helen, "there's one thing I'd like to ask." "Of course, Mrs. Helen." "Stop calling me Mrs. Helen. We're partners now. You can just call me Helen." Jack smiled, understanding the gesture of inclusion Helen was making. "All right." "Helen." The afternoon continued with detailed business planning. They discussed location, necessary equipment, marketing strategy, pricing structure, and even the name of the shop. "How about Precision Motors?" suggested Richard. "Too generic," Jack opined. "I prefer something that highlights our specialty." "Like what?" "Classic and sport. It indicates we work with both classic and sports cars." "I like it," Helen agreed. "It's straightforward and elegant." When Jack finally prepared to leave, he carried with him not only the keys to his recovered car, but also preliminary partnership contracts and a future outlook he hadn't experienced in 2 years. "Jack," said Richard at their farewell, "thank you for giving me this second chance." "Second chance?" "To do the right thing. To be better than I was in the club parking lot." Jack studied Richard's face for a moment before responding. "Mr. Richard. Richard, we all deserve second chances, including you." The following week was a series of intense activities. Jack and Richard visited various commercial properties, searching for the ideal location for the shop. They found a warehouse in an industrial area near the city centre, with adequate space for the shop, office and customer parking. "What do you think?" asked Richard. Jack walked through the empty space, visualizing the layout of equipment, work areas and vehicle flow. "It's perfect," he said finally. "It has room to grow, accessible location, and the structure is already suitable. So we have a deal. While Richard handled the legal and bureaucratic aspects, Jack dedicated himself to researching equipment and suppliers. His practical experience was crucial for identifying what was truly necessary versus what would be just for show. "We need a top-of-the-line car lift," explained Jack. "It's the heart of the operation." "How much does it cost?" "A good one costs about $50,000, but it'll last 20 years if well maintained." "And the rest?" Jack presented a detailed list he had prepared, dividing the equipment by priority and estimating costs. "To start well, we need to invest about $300,000 in equipment. Later, we can add more as the business grows." Richard studied the numbers. It was a significant investment, but it was within the budget he and Charles had set. "Let's go ahead." Charles had remained more reserved during the process, but Jack noticed that he followed everything attentively and asked pertinent questions about financial and market aspects. "Charles," said Jack during a meeting, "are you satisfied with the progress?" "I'm impressed," admitted Charles. "Your planning ability is much better than I expected." "What did you expect?" "Honestly, I thought you'd be just another skilled mechanic, but perhaps without business vision. I was wrong." Charles's recognition meant a lot to Jack. He knew that winning the trust of the more skeptical partner would be crucial to the success of the partnership. Brian followed the process with growing enthusiasm. He visited the warehouse several times, helped with the initial cleaning and began studying technical manuals that Jack had lent him. "Dad," Brian said to Richard one night, "I think I've found what I want to do with my life." "Mechanics?" "Mechanical engineering, more specifically. I want to understand not just how to fix cars, but how to design and improve them." Richard felt proud. His son was developing a genuine passion for a technical field, not just following family or social expectations. "It's a good area," agreed Richard. "And working with Jack, you'll have an excellent practical foundation." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The opening of Classic and Sport was scheduled for 1 month after the rental contract was signed. Jack insisted on having a modest opening, just for friends and potential clients, but Helen convinced everyone that they deserved a proper celebration. "You're underestimating the impact this business can have," argued Helen. "A specialized workshop with qualified professionals can change the market's perception of automotive services in our city." "How so?" asked Jack. "Currently, luxury car owners have to travel to the capital to get truly specialized services. You can change that." Helen's observation made Jack and Richard realize they had underestimated the business's market potential. It wasn't just a local workshop, but filling a real gap in the regional market. With this insight, they decided to invest even more in state-of-the-art equipment and professional marketing. Jack suggested creating a digital portfolio documenting some of the most impressive work he had done throughout his career. "The problem is I don't have photos of most of the cars I've worked on," lamented Jack. "No problem," said Brian. "We can start documenting everything from now on, and you can use your own car as the first demonstration." Brian's suggestion was smart. Jack's orange car would be an excellent showcase of the kind of work the workshop could perform. "I'll make some additional improvements to the car," decided Jack. "Nothing dramatic, but small details that show our attention to quality." "Like what?" "Fine-tuning the engine to optimize performance, small aesthetic modifications that enhance the original design, perhaps a discreet but high-end new sound system." Richard liked the idea. "It would be a way to show that we don't just fix but also improve." Exactly. In the days leading up to the opening, the workshop became a hub of frantic activity. Equipment arrived daily. Jack supervised the installation of each item, and Brian helped with youthful enthusiasm in everything he could. Helen, in turn, took care of the marketing and communication aspects. She hired a designer to create an elegant visual identity for the company and a professional photographer to document the space and equipment. "I want everything to look professional from day one," explained Helen. "First impressions are crucial in this type of business." Jack was impressed by the attention to detail that Helen demonstrated. It was clear that she didn't see the workshop merely as her husband's project, but as a serious family enterprise. "Helen," said Jack, "you're investing much more than I initially imagined." "And you're contributing far more than we imagined," she replied. "Jack, your dedication and professionalism are exceeding our expectations. But if the business doesn't work out, it will work out. I'm sure of it." Helen's confidence was contagious, but Jack knew that success would depend on consistent execution and gradual reputation building. "What worries me is managing expectations," Jack confessed. "I don't want to disappoint you." "Jack," Richard interjected, "the only way you could disappoint us is if you didn't try your best. And from what we've seen so far, that's not a risk." The conversation took place on the eve of the opening, while they were making final adjustments to the space. The workshop was impeccable, with organized equipment, a comfortable customer reception area, and Jack's car strategically positioned as the centerpiece. "How many people are you expecting tomorrow?" asked Jack. "We invited about 50, Helen replied. "Local business owners, luxury car owners we know, some journalists from the region." "Journalists?" Jack became nervous. "Don't worry," Richard reassured him. "It will be positive coverage. Helen took care of everything." The morning of the opening dawned sunny. Jack arrived early at the workshop to check that everything was in order. He found Brian already there, polishing a tool that was already spotless. "Nervous?" asked Jack. "A little," admitted Brian. "And you?" "Very. It's been years since I've put myself out there like this." "Everything will be fine, Mr. Jack. Your work speaks for itself." The first person to arrive was Charles, followed by Richard and Helen. Gradually, the space filled with curious and interested guests. Jack observed people's reactions as they explored the workshop. There was admiration for the equipment, interest in the technical explanations he provided, and particular fascination with his customized car. "How did you achieve this color?" asked a local dealership owner. "Custom blend of 3 pigments," explained Jack. "It took me 2 months to get the exact shade I wanted." "And the performance?" 20% increase in power without compromising reliability. The secret is in fine-tuning, not dramatic modifications." Jack's technical explanations impressed the connoisseurs present. It was clear that he wasn't just a competent mechanic, but a true automotive performance specialist. A memorable moment during the opening occurred when a potential customer brought his own sports car and asked Jack for his opinion on some problems he was experiencing. "May I take a look?" asked Jack. "Of course." Jack spent a few minutes examining the vehicle, listening to the engine, checking visible components. After a quick analysis, he made an accurate diagnosis of the problem. "Your ignition system is out of adjustment," said Jack, "probably due to improper maintenance during the last service." "How can you be sure?" "By the sound of the engine and how it responds to the throttle. I can fix this in an hour if you'd like to leave it." The car owner looked around, noticing that the entire opening had stopped to observe Jack's impromptu demonstration of technical competence. "Let's do it," the man decided. What followed was an impressive practical demonstration. Jack worked on the car with Brian as his assistant, explaining each step to the interested observers. In less than an hour, the problem was solved. When the engine was started again, the difference was audible. The car ran more smoothly and responded better. "Amazing," said the owner. "How much did this service cost?" "Today it's free," said Jack. "It's the grand opening." "But normally?" Jack mentioned a figure that was fair but not cheap. The customer paid immediately and scheduled a full service for the following week. "This was our first official customer," announced Richard to those present, who applauded spontaneously. The rest of the opening proceeded with positive energy. Several other owners of high-quality cars approached to discuss services. Some left business cards, and there was genuine interest in what the shop could offer. When the last guest left, the Classic and Sport team gathered to evaluate the day. "How do you think it went?" asked Jack. "Better than we expected," replied Charles. "The interest was genuine, not just courtesy." "And the demonstration with that car was perfect," added Helen. "It showed your competence in a practical way." "Brian was an excellent assistant," praised Jack. "If he continues like this, he'll become an excellent mechanic." The young man beamed at the compliment. "When can I start working here regularly?" "During school breaks," said Helen. "And maybe some weekends, if your grades stay good." "Deal!" Richard watched the interactions with satisfaction. The partnership that had begun as an attempt to fix a mistake was developing into something much more significant. "Jack," said Richard, "today you proved we made the right choice." "Thank you, Richard, but the real test will be in the coming months when we have to deliver consistent results." "I have no doubts," declared Helen. "You've built something special here." The first weeks of Classic and Sports operation confirmed the optimism of the opening. Customers came regularly, attracted by the combination of technical competence and professional service the shop offered. Jack quickly adapted to the more structured business pace. He created quality control systems, established standardized procedures for different types of service, and kept detailed records of each job performed. "Why do you document everything in such detail?" asked Brian during an internship afternoon. "Two reasons," explained Jack. "First, if a customer comes back 2 years from now, I'll know exactly what was done to their car. Second, this documentation is our legal protection and our proof of quality." Jack's attention to administrative details impressed Richard and Charles. They had expected an excellent mechanic but found a competent manager as well. "Jack is exceeding expectations in every area," commented Charles during a weekly partners meeting. "And the numbers?" asked Richard. "Promising. We've been operating with a positive margin since the second week, and the schedule is getting fuller." The shop's reputation grew through recommendations from satisfied customers. Luxury car owners form a relatively small community in any city, and news about service quality circulates quickly in this circle. "I got an interesting call today," said Jack during a meeting. "A collector from the capital wants to bring 3 classic cars for complete restoration." "Is that good?" asked Richard. "It's excellent. Complete restoration of classic cars is the most profitable work and the one that best demonstrates technical capability. But it's also the riskiest." "Why?" "Because it takes months to complete, requires a high investment in rare parts, and any mistake can cost a fortune." Charles became interested in the discussion. "What would the project cost?" "Around $200,000, with a profit margin of about 40%. "And the risks?" "Mainly in parts. Some are hard to find and may cost much more than initially estimated." The team discussed the project for several hours. They decided to accept it, but with very detailed contracts about deadlines, costs, and responsibilities. "This will be our first big test," noted Jack. The restoration project attracted even more attention to the workshop. Word about the work spread, and Classic and Sport started receiving inquiries from other collectors and enthusiasts. Brian closely followed the entire restoration process during his school break. He learned techniques that weren't available in books, developed practical skills, and began to understand the real complexity of specialized automotive work. "Mr. Jack," Brian said one day, "do you think I have a knack for this?" "Brian, you have curiosity, patience, and respect for the work. That's 80% of what's needed. The rest is learned over time. And the other 20%? Passion. You have to love what you do, otherwise it just becomes a job. I think I have passion, reflected Brian. I like understanding how things work and making them work better. Then you have a future in this field. The conversation happened while they were working on restoring a 1972 classic sedan. Jack was teaching Brian delicate welding techniques to repair small damages on the body. How did you learn to do this? Asked Brian, watching Jack work with surgical precision. By practicing, making a lot of mistakes at first, learning from each one until I got it right. Did you ever think about giving up? Many times, especially after I lost the workshop. I thought about changing professions, doing something else. Why didn't you? Jack stopped working and looked at Brian. Because this is my calling. Even in the worst moments, I knew this was what I wanted to do with my life. The answer deeply touched Brian. The teenager began to understand that choosing a career wasn't just about salary or status, but about finding something that gave meaning to life. Months after the opening, Classic and Sport had established itself as the leading specialized workshop in the region. The schedule was full, the reputation solid, and profits exceeded initial projections. It's time to think about expansion, suggested Charles during a meeting. What kind of expansion? Asked Jack. Maybe a second location specifically focused on vintage cars or a specialized parts store. Jack considered the suggestions. I prefer to grow with quality rather than speed, he said finally. Let's consolidate our current position before expanding. Richard agreed with Jack's prudence. He's right. Better to be excellent at one thing than average at several. The decision to grow in a controlled manner proved to be right. The workshop maintained its quality standards while gradually increasing its service capacity. Helen, who had initially only been involved in marketing and communication, began to participate more actively in the business's administrative management. You have a talent for business, observed Jack. A surprise to me too, laughed Helen. I never thought I'd be interested in cars or mechanics. It's not about the cars, explained Richard. It's about the challenge of building something of quality. Richard's observation was correct. Helen had fallen in love with the process of creating an excellent business, regardless of the sector. 1 year after its opening, Classic and Sport employed 8 people, served customers from 3 states, and had become a national reference in classic car restoration. Do you remember how it all started? Asked Helen during the 1-year celebration. With a stupid attempt at humiliation in the club parking lot, replied Richard with a mix of shame and gratitude. And look what it turned into, added Jack. Brian, now 18 and about to enter mechanical engineering college, had become a competent mechanic in his own right. Mr. Jack, said Brian, you changed my life. You changed your own life, Brian. I just showed you some possibilities. No, it was more than that. You taught me that well-done work has value regardless of what the job is. The 1-year party was a celebration not only of commercial success, but of the personal transformations the business had provided to everyone involved. Richard had discovered satisfaction in investing in people, not just in financial returns. Helen had found a professional passion she didn't know she had. Brian had discovered his vocation. And Jack had regained not only his car and his financial stability, but also his dignity and sense of purpose. Where do we go from here? Asked Charles. Wherever the quality of our work takes us, replied Jack. It was an answer that perfectly summarized the philosophy that had guided the shop's growth. Technical excellence, integrity in relationships, and patience to build something lasting. 2 years later, when Classic and Sport opened its second unit specializing in race cars, Jack looked back and marveled at the journey that had started with an embarrassing confrontation in a parking lot. The orange car was still his personal showcase, but now it was accompanied by a fleet of demonstration vehicles that exemplified different aspects of the shop's work. Jack, said Richard during the opening of the second unit, thank you for teaching me that humility is the foundation of every real achievement. Thank you for teaching me that second chances can lead to first opportunities, replied Jack. The exchange of thanks summarized the mutual transformation that had occurred. Richard had learned to value people for their character and competence, not for their social position. Jack had learned to trust partnerships again and to believe in his own worth. Brian, now studying mechanical engineering and interning at the shop on weekends, represented the continuity of the philosophy that had been established, a combination of rigorous technical knowledge with solid values. "Mr. Jack," said Brian during a work break, "when I graduate, can I come back to work here?" "Brian, when you graduate, you'll have many options. Choose the one that makes your heart beat the fastest." "This one makes my heart beat the fastest. Then you'll always have a place here." The conversation took place while they were working on an experimental prototype, a car that combined classic technology with modern innovations. It was a project that perfectly symbolized the shop's philosophy, respect for tradition combined with a constant pursuit of improvement. Helen watched from the administrative area, seeing her son working alongside the man who had become much more than a business partner. Jack was now part of the family, not out of obligation or gratitude, but out of genuine affection and mutual respect. "How do you assess our journey so far?" Helen asked Richard. "As the greatest lesson in humility of my life," replied Richard, "and the greatest source of pride too." "Why?" "Because I learned that true success isn't what you achieve alone, but what you build together with other people." Richard's response showed how the experience had changed his core priorities. The arrogant businessman who had tried to humiliate a stranger in the parking lot had transformed into a leader who valued collaboration and mutual growth. 5 years after the opening, when Classic and Sport received the Best Specialized Workshop in the Country award from a national automotive magazine, the entire team gathered to celebrate. "This award belongs to all of us," Jack said in his acceptance speech, "because it was built with the work, dedication and dreams of every person who has been part of this journey." In the audience, Richard, Helen, Brian and Charles applauded with genuine pride. They had created not just a successful business, but a community of people united by shared values and common goals. After the ceremony, when they were all gathered at the hotel restaurant to celebrate, Jack made a special toast. "I want to thank Richard," Jack said, raising his glass, "for having the courage to admit his mistake and the wisdom to turn it into an opportunity." "And I want to thank Jack," Richard replied, "for showing me that true wealth lies in the people we choose to have by our side." The toast was met with emotional applause. Helen wiped away a tear, Brian smiled proudly, and Charles nodded in approval of everyone's growth. Later that evening, when they were alone in the hotel room, Helen said to Richard, "Do you remember that day in the parking lot?" "How could I forget? It was one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. And look what it turned into. Sometimes I wonder what our lives would be like if I hadn't made that mistake." "It wouldn't be better or worse," Helen reflected. "It would be different. But I'm happy with the path we've taken." "Me too. Jack made us better people." "We became better people. Jack just showed us the way." Helen's reflection captured the essence of the transformation that had occurred. It wasn't about a change imposed from outside, but an internal growth that had been inspired and guided by Jack's example of dignity and perseverance. 10 years later, when Brian graduated in mechanical engineering and officially took over as managing partner of Classic and Sports Development Division, the company had become a nationally recognized brand known for technical excellence and responsible innovation. Jack's orange car, now over a decade old with a shared history, was still displayed in the main workshop's reception area as a symbol of the journey they had all taken together. "Mr. Jack," Brian said in his first week as an official partner, "do you still remember what I was like when I started interning here?" "I do. You were a teenager full of energy and curiosity, but without much focus." "And now?" "Now you're a young adult full of energy and curiosity, but with very clear focus." "What else has changed?" "Your confidence. Before you doubted whether you were capable, now you know you can tackle any technical challenge that comes up." "You're the one who taught me that." "No, Brian. I just created opportunities for you to discover your own abilities." The conversation reflected the teaching approach Jack had developed over the years, not just with Brian, but with all the young mechanics who had passed through the workshop. He believed in guiding without imposing, in teaching through practical example, and in allowing each person to discover their own talents. The workshop had become a respected professional training center with an internship program that attracted engineering students from across the country. Jack had systematized his practical knowledge into a curriculum that combined rigorous theory with hands-on application. "Professor Jack," Richard joked during a visit to the workshop, "who would have thought you'd become an educator too?" "I've always been an educator," corrected Jack. "I just didn't know I had a talent for it." "How did you discover it?" "By observing how Brian and other young people responded when I explained complex concepts in simple, practical ways." Jack's teaching ability had emerged naturally from his professional experience and his natural patience with people in the learning process. He had discovered that teaching not only transmitted knowledge, but also deepened his own understanding of technical principles. Helen, now the company's general manager, had developed management systems that maintained the family culture, even as the operation grew. "How do you maintain a personal environment in a company with over 50 employees?" asked a business consultant during a visit. "By treating each employee as we treat the partners," explained Helen, "with respect, transparency, and clear expectations. And does it work? Our staff turnover is practically zero, and our productivity is above the industry average." The management approach Helen had developed reflected the values that the partnership with Jack had established from the beginning. Quality of relationships as the foundation for quality of results. Charles had taken responsibility for the company's strategic expansion, but always carefully and aligned with core values. "We received a proposal to franchise our brand in other states," Charles informed during a partners meeting. "And what do you think?" asked Jack. "It depends on whether we can ensure that franchisees maintain our quality standards." "How would we do that?" "Intensive training program here at headquarters, constant supervision, and strict selection criteria." The franchising discussion exemplified how the company approached growth opportunities, always questioning whether they could maintain their characteristic excellence in expanded operations. 15 years after the parking lot encounter, when Jack turned 60, Classic and Sport organized a celebration that brought together customers, employees, suppliers, and the national automotive community. "Jack Peterson revolutionized our perception of what an auto repair shop can be," declared the president of the National Mechanics Association during the tribute. "He proved that technical competence, business integrity, and social responsibility are not only compatible but mutually reinforcing." Professional recognition meant a lot to Jack, but what moved him most were the personal testimonies from young mechanics who had been inspired by his example. "Mr. Jack," said a young female mechanic who had interned at the shop, "you showed me that women can succeed in this profession if they're competent and determined." "You showed that to yourself," corrected Jack. "I just created an environment where your talent could flourish." The presence of several women on the Classic and Sport team was the result of inclusive policies Jack had implemented, based on his belief that competence has no gender. During the birthday party, Richard gave an emotional speech about their shared journey. "15 years ago," said Richard, "I made a terrible mistake by trying to humiliate a man I didn't know. Today I can say that mistake was the best thing that ever happened to me." "Why?" someone in the audience asked. "Because it taught me true humility and introduced me to the man who would become my best friend and greatest inspiration." Richard's speech was met with warm applause, especially from Jack, who was moved by the public recognition of the friendship that had developed between them. Helen also made sure to speak. "Jack Peterson didn't just recover his car that day," she said. "He recovered our family. He taught us values we didn't know we had lost: respect for honest work, appreciation of competence over appearance, and the importance of treating all people with dignity." Brian, now a respected mechanical engineer and recognized innovator in the industry, concluded the tributes. "Mr. Jack," said Brian, looking directly at his mentor, "you taught me that technical excellence is important, but character is fundamental. That knowledge should be shared, not kept, and that true success is measured by the positive impact we have on other people's lives." Brian's words perfectly summarized the legacy Jack was building, not just a successful company, but a generation of professionals shaped by solid principles. 20 years after the initial episode, when Classic and Sport completed 2 decades of operation, the entire story was documented in a book that became a case study in business schools. The book's title was From Confrontation to Collaboration: How a Mistake Became an Opportunity. "Who would have thought our story would be studied by college students?" commented Jack during the book launch. "It's not our story that's special," observed Richard. "It's the lesson it teaches about personal transformation and second chances." The book highlighted how small moments can have enormous consequences, especially when the people involved have the courage to admit mistakes and the wisdom to turn them into opportunities for growth. Helen, now recognized as one of the leading executives in the national automotive industry, was frequently invited to speak about management and leadership. "What's the secret to your company's success?" they invariably asked. "Treating people as people, not as resources," Helen would reply, "and never forgetting that behind every product or service, there's a network of human relationships." Helen's management philosophy had influenced other companies in the sector, creating a movement toward more humanized and sustainable practices. Charles, who had started as a skeptical investor, became a passionate advocate for the business model that Classic and Sport had developed. "You've proven that it's possible to be highly profitable without sacrificing human values," Charles said during an investors' conference. "In fact, solid values aren't incompatible with financial success. They're the foundation for sustainable success." Charles's statement was supported by impressive numbers. Classic and Sport had grown consistently for 2 decades, maintaining profit margins above the industry average, while heavily investing in training, personal development, and social responsibility. When Jack turned 65, he decided to gradually transfer his operational responsibilities to Brian and other managers, but remained active as a consultant and mentor. "Why don't you retire completely?" Helen asked. "Because I still have much to teach and much to learn," Jack replied. "And because this workshop is more than my job, it's my calling." Jack's decision to remain involved reflected his genuine passion for the profession and his perceived responsibility toward the young professionals who continued seeking guidance. One of the projects that Jack took most pride in during his later years in operational leadership was the creation of an educational foundation that offered scholarships to low-income youth interested in technical careers. "Why invest in technical education?" a journalist asked. "Because the country needs skilled professionals in all areas," Jack explained, "and because talent exists in all social classes. We just need to create opportunities for it to develop." The foundation had become a national model, training hundreds of young people in various technical specialties and creating a virtuous cycle of social mobility through education. The orange car, now with over 20 years of shared history, had become a museum piece preserved in the entrance hall of the company's headquarters. A plaque beside it told the story of how an embarrassing confrontation had transformed into the foundation of one of the most respected companies in the industry. "Sometimes I bring my grandchildren here to see the car and tell the story," Jack said to a group of visitors. "What do they think?" "They're amazed that something so beautiful came from something so ugly," Jack laughed. The children's perspective perfectly captured the essence of the transformation. Beauty emerging from initially negative situations through the right choices and persistence. During the last years of his active career, Jack dedicated special time to systematizing all the knowledge he had accumulated. He created technical manuals, educational videos, and a certification program that became the industry standard. "Why document so much?" Brian asked. "Because knowledge that isn't shared is lost when a person ages," Jack explained. "I want everything I've learned to continue benefiting people long after I'm gone." Jack's documentation project resulted in a technical library that became a national reference, consulted by mechanics, engineers, and students from across the country. When Jack finally retired from operational leadership at 70, the transition ceremony was a national event that brought together representatives from across the automotive industry. "Jack Peterson redefined our profession," declared the sector minister during the ceremony. "He elevated the technical, ethical, and social standards of what it means to be a mechanic in the United States." The official recognition was gratifying, But Jack was more interested in the practical results of his work. Dozens of well-trained young professionals, a solid and ethical company, and a community benefited by quality jobs and educational opportunities. In his farewell speech, Jack made sure to thank everyone who had been part of the journey. "This story began with Richard trying to humiliate me," Jack said with a smile, "and it ends with all of us united by mutual respect and common goals. This proves that any situation can be transformed if the people involved choose to grow instead of resent." The ceremony was emotional, but Jack made it clear that his retirement from operational leadership didn't mean a complete departure. "I'll be here whenever you need me," he promised. "This will always be my home." End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're following us from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Jack made the right decisions throughout the journey? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.